think uh, no doubt about it. Like you have to be able to demonstrate performance in some way, right? Like of your investments in media, and I think in some ways with the increasing opacity of like user level tracking, I think the iOS is a great example, right? Of and even the let's say the proactive response was sort of scan, right? So SCAD network essentially, which is aggregate campaign level
Mm-hmm.
reporting, right? For so again, it's not, which is, I mean, I hope many advertisers are taking advantage of that. But again, gone are these kind of user level insights, right? When you use that
Mm.
approach, you're essentially seeing aggregate either app install or post install conversion metrics at campaign level resolution, right? So,
Yeah, Patrick, and I think the other thing that's, I mean, I'm not naturally an optimist.
Get ready to deep dive into the world of digital transformation, where we explore the latest trends, innovations, and challenges shaking up industries. Join us as we decode the secrets behind successful digital strategies and hear from experts who are at the forefront of disrupting the status quo. In each episode, we'll unravel the mysteries of the digital realm and uncover the hidden opportunities that lie within. From artificial intelligence to blockchain, from automation to cybersecurity, we'll leave no digital stone unturned. But hold on tight, because this podcast isn't your average tech talk. We're injecting a hefty dose of wit and humor into every episode, making learning about digital transformation an absolute blast. So if you're ready to embrace the digital revolution with a smile on your face, tune in to the Digital Disruption Podcast and get ready to be entertained, informed, and inspired. Don't miss out on the fun. Subscribe now and join us on this wild digital journey.
You go first. Okay.
And welcome to the Digital Disruption Podcast. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Andrew Alexander from TMI. It's always great to have a guest. I've worked with Andrew on multiple clients in collaboration over probably the last 6 or 7 years. So hi, Andrew. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Patrick. It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you for the privilege of joining you on a forum like this. A little bit about myself. Firstly, just to echo the fact that we have indeed worked together, very convivial and helpful, certainly from my side, collaboration over the years. I am, as Patrick said, from an independent agency called The Media Image. And the acronym there is TMI. Sometimes when things, as an independent agency with slightly less structured statements of works, when things get hectic, I always remind people that TMI also stands for transmarginal inhibition, which is a term developed by Pavlov, meaning a breakdown. But thankfully, that doesn't happen very much. Organisms' response to overwhelming stimuli. But yes, we're an independent agency. We're founded in London. We have there's about 100 of us. We have a back office in South Africa, which is just a cost center, but we have a lot of account managers there. Founded in London, but as it happens, the vast majority of our clients are in the United States. And Patrick can be easily inserted into the genealogy there. Our first client in New York was in the health and beauty sector, and had recently switched from Adobe to Google Analytics. And so there was Patrick was doing obviously a lot of the heavy lifting in the dev implementation, but both him and I had a lot of education work to do because there was it was all new for people.
Yep.
So that's when Patrick and I met, and then over the years there've been other 360 clients, and of course more recently the collaboration has intensified uh, given all the changes
Yes.
happening. And I think that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. So yeah,
Yeah.
thanks again.
Andrew, point of fact. Yeah. Yeah. Andrew, point of fact, we transitioned them from Adobe to GA360 in 30 days time, if you recall. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd forgotten that it was that truncated, but
Yeah.
I remember it was interesting because there were some people who obviously were very fond of the previous system, and
Yes.
it was the case. The transition is not only educational but psychological. I think
I
some people
agree.
just
Yeah.
simply don't like change. I know we're going to talk a bit about that today, but that's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good to connect. I mean, we've had a chance to work on enough clients together, and we'll get into some of these topics today. But having focused on the data side of digital marketing for the past, most of a decade, it's always great to find players in the industry that we collaborate well with. And I think, you personally and the media image as a company, that's always been the case. And we really do appreciate that. And so it goes a long way, I think, to helping produce client results as well. So I
Yes,
guess
thank you.
yeah,
And right
yeah,
back at you. In the e-CENS, we have some clients who don't have official implementation partners, and the difference is huge. So our gratitude extends, if not stronger, in the other direction. So yeah, looking forward to the chat today.
All right. So let's kick it off. We've had a chance to work together on several shared clients over the years. And I've heard you mention this term, institutional arthritis, a couple of times. And, it's in the context of kind of reluctance to change, right? How do you think that relates in your experience to recent and ongoing transition from, say, Universal Analytics to GA4? And I guess we can expand that to the tectonic kind of shifts we're seeing in the industry overall. And just to, I guess,
Yeah.
get a chuckle, we've had a little reprieve from the third-party cookie deprecation timeline, but it's still
Yes.
coming
I
at
mean,
some point.
talk about institutional arthritis. I mean, I wonder if there's anything going on there. The term, I mean, you use the term. It's funny. We I wonder if it's an aspect of sort of self-confirmation bias. I think that the term came out of me. It's possible I read it somewhere, and also just given how the world works, it's probably possible that a lot of other people have said it before. But the term institutional arthritis is something that just caught on, or it resonates pretty much any time I use it, and I think at first, in the context of Google Analytics as a platform, it's interesting because we have, despite having some very large clients who have 360, we have a big spectrum of clients who use Universal Analytics. And the deadline for that transition was last year, July 1st. And what I said was, why institutional arthritis seemed so relevant there was from January, I thought, January of 2023, for these smaller clients, I thought, they don't have the dev support, generally speaking, if they can't afford Google Analytics 360, they're going to need some help. They're probably going to need more help. There's less internal education. We have a small dev team that can, through GTM, can do some implementation work. But I knew that there was going to be a real seismic shift come July 1st in their reporting, and it was just sensible to get going early. And so the institutional arthritis was less so internally because I was pretty dogmatic about it, but I just kept suggesting on calls, why don't we set a date by April 1st to move over to and it wasn't anything too comprehensive. It was and not only myself, but if Google was being quite forthright about it as well. Understandably, they had that big countdown thing that you couldn't miss. I mean, that was the biggest font I think available on the computer, 58 days and counting. And you just got the sense that people also bought into it as well. They could see the good idea. And I suppose like a I don't know. I mean, I suppose why there's such a huge and varied industry in the dieting world, the principles themselves are quite simple. A calorie deficit, more exercise, but the implementation is difficult. So I think people to try and, so the institutional writers it's not really a criticism. I think it's just an observation. It's more positive rather than normative. And I think what happened was that if you looking at it when I was chivying people or trying to suggest that it would be unwise to do a whole lot of the transitioning in the June, I realized that where it came, where I think it was coming from, was that it's always worth remembering that the people you're talking to are reporting upwards. And I think internal digital marketers on the client side completely understood that the world was changing. There was privacy laws that were intensifying, and they understood the overall narrative. But they were worried, in my opinion, if you boil it down, they were concerned that the results were going to be different. Mm-hmm. And that in this new world, $100 the year before spent was now going to be more difficult to it was going to be difficult to improve year on year with the same keyword and the same campaign. And people are always looking for that, and also harder to attribute. So I think that there was a fear of people who hadn't, reporting to people who hadn't the time to appreciate what was going on. They were just looking for the numbers. And then also some understandable fear of whatever complexity arose outside with new attribution models. I mean, a good example was, and again, a good example was how, in order to ease the transition, we often said, okay, well, let's replicate the dashboards, Looker Studio dashboards, and we'll keep the old UA tabs and have a GA4 tab running. And I think it was really only until the data started deprecating in the universal analytics that some people changed over. And again, it's I emphasize it's not a criticism. We completely understood it. But
yeah, no, you bring up a good point. If I may pause you for 1 second, is like people have and still have a lot of business process, marketing process is rooted in universal analytics still, especially if they are a GA360 account holder, right? Now, for anybody who was on UA standard has had to make the migration, but so there's a lot of process wrapped up in those legacy investments, right? And so there's a bit of, I guess, reluctance. I don't want to go as far as to say complacency, because everybody kind of was aware of what needed to happen, but it did seem to push some of that, I guess, getting off the starter blocks down to the 11th hour, right? So
yeah, and I think the other thing was particularly what it struck me, and it was, again, funnily enough, the universal analytics. I mean, I once made the mistake of because it was one call where I felt that the complaints associated with standard analytics were starting to get unproductive, and I said it's worth bearing in mind this is a free tool, but that's another thing that was interesting, is because I got initially, it's worth remembering that the deadlines were the same originally a few years ago for analytics, standard and GA. And in the context of what you raised earlier, I think Google's an extraordinarily complex and organization filled with competent people, but there might have been some institutional arthritis there, because I think it might have been that because it was the first time of something this nature, this seismic in digital marketing, the understanding of how complex it would be unfolded or evolved. So they split that to be a year. And so a lot of the universal analytics people noticing changes in the interface, improvements of data freshness, and some of the return of metrics like bounce rate. I said to people, just hang on a bit. We think, and again, this was I suppose an informed speculation, but we didn't have any confirmation from Google. We thought what was happening is they thought, we're testing this thing. The free users are the guinea pigs, as are free users for pretty much any software tool.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And it'll probably normalize once the GA4 360 deadline. But I mean, Patrick, you come from the dev side, or more the implementation side. I mean, I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts on kind of some of the challenges, because it's a whole retagging.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is really interesting, right? So, like, some people really rushed to implement GA4, but they didn't implement it with parity to universal analytics, right? They sort of put in place a very bare bones, right, basic data collection to get something live, and then they never went back, right, sort of in anticipation of deadlines, and then they never really went back and made that implementation fully robust. Some people implemented GA4 when it was still a bit of a, half-baked, it wasn't fully baked tool yet, right? So that's another reason why in some cases those implementations are I would say already out of date. And then honestly, the reason why the whole concept of institutional arthritis resonated with me is because I also see a lot of people who haven't taken sufficient time to just familiarize themselves with the new data model, the new reporting, the new kind of conceptual framework of GA4, like really what is different about data-driven attribution, right? How are the traffic acquisition and user acquisition reports really are different from last non-direct clicked in universal analytics, right? So I think in some ways people haven't like readjusted their mindset yet to the differences between the platforms.
Yeah, Patrick, I mean, it'd be interesting if you could say something about that. I mean, what maybe might work if you'll allow me is I'll tell you some in terms of just sort of I call myself, I've said to Patrick before, I see my graphical user, see myself as a graphical user interface guide. I'm not entirely sure what's going on under the hood, but let me maybe say how I understand this change, and Patrick, you can maybe flesh it out with more complexity. But so someone comes to me and says, well, once it's, I mean, this is an actual client example. Once we're transitioned, how are we going to say, let's call it, let's leave July for its own chaos. Once we get to August and we're fully on GA4 360, and we got a similar type of annual promotion for certain core products and with a certain focus. And what do we do when we come to the end of August 2024 and we're looking to compare how we did year on year? So are we to say to people, just forget about the previous years? And you explained this to me, Patrick, but the core thing that I would be interested in you fleshing out is last non-direct click, okay? So when you showed me that dimension of the direct session as a secondary dimension to the source medium combinations, we could see in the example we looked at that about 25% of the revenue associated with a certain paid media channel was actually the converting source medium was direct.
Yeah.
And so the second to last click was that paid media channel, and then the other 75, that was the last session. So yeah. I think the natural question for someone who you explain that to is, well, where the hell did it go? Does it all get bunched in direct? And the two things that I thought, and then I'm going to hand it back to you, is A, we need to focus on the last, before we say non-direct, it was a last click model. And DDA is A, it might not just get bunched in direct because this facility is gone. It might be spread along a conversion path. And then number two, DDA, as I understand it, is provided you meet the session and revenue thresholds, it's a bespoke model per client. That's how they pitch it, as opposed to a cookie cutter, which was the last non-direct click. I'll leave it there, but that's the kind of challenges you get.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So absolutely a massive difference is direct sessions that have prior paid media or other campaign data associated within universal analytics is a very different beast than the acquisition reports in GA4 and the data driven attribution in GA4 because data driven attribution, it is bespoke in the sense that it uses your unique conversion path data, but I would push back and say it's still algorithmic, right? So it's essentially using Shapley value formula and the Markov chain analysis. So but the thing that makes it bespoke, right, is it's not just taking a simple rule-based logic, right? Give 20% to the first touch and 20% to the last touch and a bunch of credit in the intermediate, right? It's basically actually comparing all of the unique converting and non-converting conversion paths for your data, and it's algorithmically determining what the fractional conversion credit should be.
Patrick, that's very interesting and very helpful. So in a sense, and it's an important distinction. So maybe if I try and phrase it like this, and again, just this is the kind of thing that might be useful when explaining to clients, it's bespoke in the sense that it's applied to your data. But the methodology is not bespoke. It's an underlying algorithmic package. I mean, fun fact, Lloyd Shapley won the Nobel Prize in mathematics. He wasn't a digital marketer, but those Shapley values. No. Yeah. He was.
I did not know that. Yeah, but it makes sense. It's quite a fruitful formula. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. I think I can't remember the exact application, but the formula. Being a mathematician, he probably didn't think it should apply to the real world at all. But it was about studying processes where there were multiple touch points before the outcome. He was known to be extremely what's the word? Unkempt. Very absent-minded professor. You can see the picture of him when he got the prize in Stockholm. It looked like he hadn't straightened his tie. But it's very nice little factoid.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. So I think
Patrick, that helps.
No worries. So I guess we got this reprieve from the third-party cookies, but I still want to ask a question about, I mean, everybody in the industry, and I think especially digital agencies are on a fast track or a slow track, but some track towards responding to this looming deprecation and also the corresponding growing importance of first-party database strategies. I'm just curious, without revealing any kind of secret sauce, but how's the media image making increasing use of first-party data?
Yeah, well, I mean, just one thing on that before I get to that, Patrick. When I was in Dublin, there was a Think Measurement Summit recently at the Google. It's the EMEA HQ. Of course, that was only 3 weeks ago, and this deadline hadn't been extended. So there's lots of institutional fluidity going on. But they, when I put my hand up, and again, this would be interesting in your opinion on this. They said, well, hold on, I want to draw a distinction between advertising platform, because this is all, of course, linked to the need for asking consent from consumers. Yeah. And they said, I want to draw a distinction between an advertising platform like Google Ads and analytics. And there's a higher bar for privacy in Google Ads because you were advertising to people and we might remarket. I mean, maybe you don't have to get to that now. I'll answer your question first. But that was an interesting notion because this whole thing within the agency arose from my department because of Google Analytics 4. But it's worth stating that this is a multi-departmental initiative because you're asking consent at the pillars of the approach mandated by Google, or the response, are what are called enhanced conversions and consent mode. So consent, for those who don't know, consent mode has to do with your cookie consent banner, and enhanced conversions are to do with your conversion counting, or the Google Ads conversion infrastructure in the absence of third-party cookies. And for those who don't know, what they're looking to do is try and find one hashed first-party data point to match. So if someone signed into their Gmail account, comes in, there's no third-party cookie picking up a GCLID, and they've opted out of cookies. It could be that the Gmail matches a data point like a Gmail in the CRM system, and then you get a match there. So they could be part of the observed data set and used for modeling. How is TMI approaching it? Well, interestingly enough, again, perhaps predictable split between the 360 clients who have implementation partners telling them that this has to be done, and they're usually ahead of the curve, and smaller clients using 360 who don't have big dev departments. We have actually developed an internal resource, someone who is capable enough ideally if they do it through Google Tag Manager, who's capable enough that we can assign that person to a client when they raise it, and he can do it for them. So we're starting there, because that's definitely the horse before the CRM data set cart. And we work with our Google rep, who has a list of because he's our non-large client services rep. And we've just been pretty systematic about that. Interesting enough, as soon as new clients come on board, especially if they've new non-360 clients, they generally ask about it as well. So that was our response, because we realized that many clients didn't have the capabilities. In terms of preparing them for that, Patrick, the one where it is our responsibility to explain to people that there's been quite a lot of education, getting people on calls and explain the dynamics of this response. I mean, it's going to get deprecated at some stage, but to say, look, the best bulwark here is to enrich your first-party data set as much as is pragmatic. I mean, it might not be pragmatic to email all your people and say, we actually only have email and phone number. Would we like your social security, your postcode, and all that? But I don't think people have thought really hard about. They think of clients, and it's not really their job. But until this matching or hashed matching of first-party data points was invoked as the coping response, I think people thought it was important to get people's details so you could email them. So the focus of a CRM system was the lifecycle department, and now there is, apart from moral suasion saying I highly recommend this, there's not much more than we can do and say, well, this is some people actually, some smaller clients knew what CRM was, but didn't realize. But sometimes the term first-party data, they didn't realize that was synonymous. And so we were just saying, these are the fields you could collect, and these are going to be available. I mean, now we were talking about it this the other day. You can enrich Google Analytics through user-provided data. So again, the first part about implementing the consent mode and enhanced conversions, that we've been pretty proactive with. There's not much we can do apart from say to a client, it's a boring kind of heavy lifting job, but any new CRM people, you can get as many of the fields as possible, and it may be worth auditing your CRM system and seeing what enrichment opportunities there are.
And are you focusing primarily within the Google advertising ecosystem then, and data ecosystem, or do you have, are you developing any best practices around first-party data in general that is agnostic to environment, or like has purchased within, say, Trade Desk, Flash Talk? I mean, I guess I was just curious, or for example, even like one of the things I've seen people focusing on, it's not something I've personally been focusing a lot of time and effort on, but some, like can you advance the capture of first party data earlier in
Uh,
the customer life cycle, for example, right? Like before I've even decided I want to be your customer or your client, right? Like maybe I'll give you, if you have really good content that I'm interested in, right? Maybe I'll give you an email address or a mobile phone number or something, right? Like, and that gives you a chance to engage with me in other ways, right? I'm just curious what other things you might be working on.
well, I suppose again, in terms of what I found interesting about this is actually because of course the dominant thrust of well, because this was going to affect Google Ads, and analytics is a native integration. We've got most of our input on this from Google,
Yeah,
but
sure.
what has been interesting, and I think uh, it was a canary in the coal mine. Really, was back in when was iOS 14.5? When
Oh,
iOS
wow.
14.5, that was April. I think it was end of April 2020. I think it was 2021. By the end of
Yeah, that
that
sounds about
year,
right. Yeah, sounds about right.
yeah, and for those who don't know what that means, I mean, most listeners know what the operating system is, but at that stage, what happened is that Apple, and I think it's a good 60%, 70% of US users had made it explicit that when you upgraded your system, you had to opt in or out of tracking on the social media apps.
Yep.
And so uh, I remember by the end of that year, our internal VP of search said the opt-out rates had been about 90%. And we had a
Yeah.
client who said to us, I can tell you that we're thinking of stopping spending on Facebook. I mean,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were being dramatic, but they were saying, how do we measure this? So
Yep.
um, uh, what we then did was ask for their non-analytics internal CRM system data and try to do some essentially mixed media modeling using linear regression and controlling for seasonality and things like that, and to try and map spend to what was their source of truth, because the opacity within the Facebook system seemed to be higher. Now,
Yeah.
why I call it a canary in the coal mine is that and again, I was looking at it the other day. It was interesting to see the if you look at the Facebook, the Meta share price, you can see that 2021 dip, and then the conversion API, all the server side
Mhm.
tracking has you get the TikTok events manager. There's the same on Snapchat. X has now got it, and so that
Yep.
move to trying to take to in marketing to remove the middleman, I think has been very interesting, because I now know even in Dublin, there's been suggestions that server-side tracking, I mean, if a user is truly unobserved, it doesn't matter if you do it on the website or the server, but it does allow more control over your own data.
Yeah, yeah,
So
for
I think,
sure.
yeah, I think when people started going, what the heck is going on here, it was very useful because people, when we said CAPI, they just said, oh, can you help us implement that? Or, okay, our dev team will do it. But I don't think there was an associating it with a narrative. They just said, oh, yeah, iOS 14.5, but it's now with the California
Mhm.
Consumer Privacy Act. It's all it's all it's all starting to blend together as a general narrative, and I think that there really is, there's a notion that, or that we want to protect the consumer's data, but also server-side tracking protects any company's data. You'd rather have it housed there
Yeah.
and not load up, ping six different platforms every time your website opens. So we don't have any, TMI doesn't have any bespoke solutions, but I guess we had to get into mixed media modeling to keep, there's an incentive to keep Facebook spend robust. The agency
Yep.
runs on management fees. And so I think that, and you've mentioned this before, I think one day, one day, sounds like it'd be in 2025, but who knows? Third-party cookies will be gone, and then there will be other measurement solutions required. And I think server-side tracking, a cross-referencing of analytics data with other CRM systems to establish maybe some sort of stable discrepancy, and then media mix modeling to try and be a third point of reference as to marketing efficacy.
Yeah, I think it's making a big comeback. I think it's going to get even more traction using some form of aggregate statistics-based analysis of one kind or another, and MMM being one. I think no doubt about it. Like, you have to be able to demonstrate performance in some way, right? Like, of your investments in media. And I think in some ways, with the increasing opacity of like user level tracking, I think the iOS is a great example, right? Of and even the let's say the proactive response was sort of scan, right? So SCAD network, essentially, which is aggregate campaign level reporting, right? For so again, it's not, which is, I mean, I hope many advertisers are taking advantage of that. But again, and gone are these kind of user level insights, right? When you use that approach, you're essentially seeing aggregate either app install or post install conversion metrics at campaign level resolution, right? So
yeah, Patrick, and I think the other thing that's, I mean, I'm not naturally an optimist. My mother was a huge optimist, and she was a lovely woman, but there was a definition of a pessimist as someone who's been intimately associated with an optimist. You tend to apply a wind correction. But I mean, I think it'd be worth, when we talk about institutional arthritis and seismic, it's difficult not to walk into cliches here, but they are quite seismic. There was a sense in which the bottom of the funnel was so measurable that no one wanted to, not no one, but people were reluctant to do anything else unless you could prove conversions.
Yeah.
And I think as a holist, there's no ways you can keep mining the people who are, and when I say bottom of the funnel, I'm talking about true bottom of the funnel, consumer what's called commercial intent search queries on a search engine. That is the bottom. So you are dealing with either or the CRM, people have bought from you before, or people who are searching for your brand. I mean, almost no one none of our clients, some of them are very large, is very on search. The generic budget is always muted. No one wants to pay the $60 a click or whatever that it is for lipstick. You want to combine it with a brand term. So, but because it was so measurable, there was this reflexive aversion to what advertising really always was the demand generation side. And I think, people talk about the Wanamaker dilemma, half of my budget is wasted. I didn't know which half it was. Once we knew what half it was, the expectation that any banner in any corner of the internet would be able to show ROAS at some stage, and people wanted the click assist path, became embedded, and it was very difficult. And I think it was very difficult to suggest, look, we can take a longer view and generate some demand. So I think the opacity might force people to say, we're moving toward a world in which the assessments are less precise, but we are willing to introduce notions of inferential uplift, as opposed to exact join the dots, it was that guy.
Yeah, it's an interesting case of going backwards to go forward, right? Or coming full circle to, I mean, right? Catalog marketers, right? Like old school marketers have been doing these very robust, data-driven, analysis of response at both ends of that spectrum, right? Of in terms of like we send out this many catalogs, we know everybody we sent these catalogs to who actually ordered from us, right? That's like bottom, of the funnel, like totally observability, right? But they also do really robust statistical analysis in terms of like at the demand generation and awareness, right, end of the spectrum, right? And marketers have been doing these kinds of things for years. And in some ways, a lot of that, like you said, because of that sort of all in a certain way, a kind of a tragic uh, illusion of last click, this kind of like observability of the of certain media channels, the high intent, low funnel, right? People kind of got away from some of that other stuff. Like you said, there was a reticence to invest in things that maybe had fuzzier uh, measurability, um, but old school marketers knew there was an impact, but now it's coming full
Yeah.
circle, I think. Yeah.
I mean, it remains to be seen, but I think the what do we use? Yeah, there's a sense in which cross the funnel conversion points are worth admitting. I mean, we had a client more recently who was happy to look at add to cart as their measure of success of an upper funnel campaign, and they were looking to count that rather than say, well, because sometimes you would get in situations where people wanted a full circle checkout transaction indication that something was working. People would say, well, there were 5 transactions. Well, then was the success, and if there were none, then this was an absolute failure. But if you can start counting, say, 300 add to carts or a 40,000 PDP views, as well as a 90% engaged session rate or something like that, it's just opened up that debate, because in the end, the search space is going to get crowded.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think having I think the other thing is having some discipline around your data and measurement. Like you mentioned the different media mix modeling that you had been able to do. Being able to establish some baseline trends, right? Like this is kind of like how your company, how your brand has grown over time. Like these, let's call it for simple math, these 100 orders you get, weekly. This is like your baseline, right? This is like your heartbeat. You're going to get these 100 orders, like unless you really like wet the bed and like have a bad product or start treating your customers poorly, right? You're going to be able to count on these 100 orders a week, right? And then we can see, right, when you layer in these other media investments, right, with some variability of budget, we can see on top of that heartbeat, you also see these response curves, right, for social media, for paid search, for programmatic, for events, whatever, right? But so you can actually start to show your clients, right? Like, no, you have invested in your brand, building this brand, these long-term media strategies, et cetera. And then we can also see that when you layer in these other performance focused media, right, you get a response. That's on top of that's on top of that heartbeat, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you remind me of a very interesting aspect there, because that baseline, what we did, as I said, we got the CRM e-commerce data, and we asked for the split between new versus returning customers. And just for the sake of illustration, the key metric in a regression analysis is something called an R squared. Mm-hmm. And people, if they remember from their university days, the correlation coefficient just showed the strength of relationship, but there was no indication of underlying causality. And I like the maths of it, because the correlation R squared is just the correlation coefficient squared. And so you get a more robust measure of the shifts in independent variable by the dependent variable. So back to that mixed media modeling we did, the R squared was stronger when we were looking at upper funnel paid social data for the new customers. It didn't really change the baseline, whether or not you were tracking them by one day click, 7 day they from the CRM data, they tended to come along and not really alter that much. So it's basically what I'm saying is I agree with you. People need to look at the customer type when assessing these things.
Well, I want to be cognizant of time and your time and our time but I do want to just kind of briefly maybe finish on a bit of a philosophical note, or we're in a competitive industry. I feel like there's a lot of room for collaboration, especially it benefits clients. And I know, like I said at the top of the call, I feel like you personally have demonstrated this over the years, and the media image as a company has. Why do you think it's so important that maybe now more than ever for companies that are on sort of different but related and overlapping aspects of digital marketing and data, digital maturity? Like, why is collaboration important, and why does it give us sort of, I guess, a cumulative, better result to our clients when we have partners in the industry that we collaborate well with?
Well, I think I'm a philosophy. I might get practical rather than philosophical here, because I think if I take, I'm obviously going to pull from one of our recent interactions. In a case like this, I don't. Universal Analytics has been doing its thing nicely, so I think of our two collaborations. One is back when they'd switched from Adobe. An example of why the collaboration worked there is we were looking for legitimacy. They were looking, Google Analytics, the Universal Analytics needed legitimacy there because there were a lot of people who they had plenty of other things to do, like their weekly basketball match with their old college buddies, and they didn't want to learn about a new platform. So why was the collaboration so important? Well, you had one person who was maybe less technical, who was, in myself, who was on the ground in the company doing the GUI interface, showing people how to use it and getting that legitimacy. And then if you have I don't think people realize how much goes on under the hood. And so a botched implementation is the fastest way to torpedo legitimacy. And I think I have been with clients who, that's why e-CENS, you and e-CENS are synonymous for me, but that's why it's so helpful, because I've been on clients who have 360, they're paying for the 360 and they don't have a Google approved implementation partner. And all you get is people, you can see it's like parents whose child doesn't sleep in the first year. They start complaining about their baby and they feel there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, like, we've got a bad one. And you get people going, and I think of a very specific client, well, this Google Analytics doesn't work. And I often say to clients, if someone comes and says we've got a data problem, or we think the performance is bad, or it's like a crazy thing happened on Tuesday, I always say, before we get diagnostically sophisticated, have there been any changes on the dev front? What's the system change history? So on that side, it is just the legitimacy of a proper implementation means the education and the orientation is so much easier. That wasn't the case, but then I just lastly touch on the more recent case with the deprecation of third-party cookies and the change from Universal Analytics to GA4. The collaboration reduced both of the time that we spent with the client, because we were able to meet in the background or chat in the background before presenting or discussing aspects of the transition that were causing problems. So it was a more efficient use of our time to collaborate and cause queries.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, if I may summarize a little bit, is not looking at your clients' other vendor partners as competitors. You both have a relationship with the client, right? And you both have expertise and things that you're responsible for, and you're trying to produce the best result for your client. And so if you are collegial and cooperative and collaborative, right, it means that you and I can ping each other on email, hey, let's have a call, right? And we can talk about the data, the marketing performance, whatever. We can talk about all the things that are on the table, right?
Very good
Uh,
point.
and what we're keeping in mind is one, we enjoy working together, and two, like we want to produce a good result for the client. There's nothing we don't there isn't really any inherent friction there or need to be cagey or competitive about things. Uh we each have an engagement we're trying to uh
Yeah, that's a
bring across the
fundamentally good
finish
point. I
line,
hadn't
right?
thought of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But
I hadn't thought of it that way. I mean, it's obvious when you say it. And in comparison, say if you're in an agency and you have a client and you run the paid social and they run the paid search, it's so hard to collaborate. So it's not only conducive for the reasons you give, but also just such a pleasure.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was a summation, but I've said to people a few times, I mean, I just don't think that I will stay in this industry if someone announces GA5 anytime soon.
That's funny to hear you say that. That would be an interesting. Hopefully, this will have some legs for a while. Yeah,
Yeah.
uh, I agree. Well, you know what, Andrew, I really appreciate you taking the time today. We've been working closely the last few months as this transition is looming. I know we'll keep working together for a while. So it's always a pleasure to get a chance to.
I hope so.
Together. Yeah. But I know you've been in the industry a while.
Yeah, likewise, Patrick. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll see you down the
road.
Well,
if GA, cheerio. Thanks so much for your time.
All right, thanks,
Bye-bye.
Andrew. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Digital Disruption Podcast. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the world of digital transformation and gained valuable insights to help navigate the ever-changing landscape. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us on our website, e-CENS.com, or connect with us on social media. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for more exciting discussions on the forefront of digital innovation. Remember, the future is now, and it's time to embrace the power of transformation. Thanks for listening.